Hello everyone, you have come to Tata Comic Preview channel. Let read together. Have fun. The little valley regained its tranquility once the game of cat and mouse began. The two gatekeepers closed their eyes, changing the screen outside the dimension by switching through the monitoring arrays already set up inside in search of any movement. It didn't take long for a heaven-trailing sect disciple to appear, frantic in his run for his life. He barely made a few steps as Lu Xie came from behind. He pointed, and green light shot his ankle. Then thick green energy spread from his heel to the rest of his body. Hi, run, kitty, run. The faster you go, the faster the poison spreads. And when it reaches your innards, you're done for. Lu Xie cackled. The guy felt his heart beating out of his chest, and he was so scared he was close to soiling himself. Lu Xie, however, was enjoying the moment of tormenting the poor devil. Noticing the green energy was almost at his thigh, he could no longer tarry. He instantly chopped his leg off and started jumping around in an attempt to flee. Lu Xie sneered and shot another green light on the other leg. He was again forced to choose between his leg and his life. The guy was horrified and crying in indignity while Lu Xie was taking his sweet time to see what he'd decide to relish in his sweet torment. It took only half an hour for the guy to be without arms and legs. Finally, Lu Xie cackled one last time and wiggled over. The audience sighed in sorrow. Exalted double dragons did the same, but out of boredom. Such an event was happening all over the place in that world. This was no longer a team battle but a one-sided slaughter. Just how on earth did heaven-trailing sect offend the demon-scheming sect to incur such cruel revenge? Holding their foreheads, the two exalted no longer bothered to watch and closed their eyes. However, none noticed that no matter how the view changed, Zhuo Fan was nowhere to be seen among the tortures. He had been gone ever since the hunt began. It was as if he was no longer in there. Whoosh! Deep in the forest, a figure appeared. The proud Zhuo turned around and nodded, "Good, this must be the blind spot in the monitoring arrays." Then his hand held a sparkling and pure crystal, a sacred stone. The black energy curled from his hand around the sacred stone and slowly dissolved it. Zhuo Fan focused on the drifting spiritual energy, following its every shift. Then his eyes lit up in glee, over there. He was gone once more. This time, Zhuo Fan was sidestepping the monitoring arrays while following the flow of spiritual energy from the sacred stone until he arrived before an unending mountain. The spiritual energy was so thick here it felt like the previous valley could not compare. To the point that the entire mountain range was like a bright azure dragon as it emitted spiritual energy. I knew it. This is a Western land's sacred mine. Who knew they'd sealed it up in here? Watching the distant mountain range, his heart shivered. The instant he got here, he was convinced that this place had to have a sacred mine. But since this was someone else's home, it was closely monitored. Looking for their treasury under Double Dragon Manor's nose was asking for the noose. So, the ingenious Zhuo Fan used heaven-trailing sect's hunt to cover his tracks and let him inspect in peace. That was why he kept telling the disciples to take it real slow, to give him time to have his share of fun. Now that he was here, his doubts were cleared. From what Xie Wuyue said, the 5 land's sacred mines could only be exploited at the edges. Most of their ores are being protected by a strong array that can only be placed by the likes of experts from the sacred domain. Who then, besides him, blowing himself up and ending up in the mortal domain, would fall so low? Moreover, the path to descend from the sacred domain was closed shut. Even a saint would find it hard to breach it, to say nothing of the others. In that case, the answer couldn't be more obvious. Squinting, Zhuo Fan pondered. This must be related to the 5 sacred beasts. Kuanpeng had him look for the other sacred beasts while keeping young Sanzi hostage. That has to be it. Zhuo Fan looked around the place, then his brow shook. The sacred mine is so important that there are tens of monitoring arrays just 100 meters from it. Not to mention they are all discreetly set up. A shame you guys met me. When it comes to arrays, yours truly is your great-great-great ancestor, Humph. Grinning, Zhuo Fan's right eye flashed golden. Besides, you should now be drawn to watching Lu Xie and the others' actions and have no attention to spare on me. Whoosh. With a snicker, Zhuo Fan vanished. He kept showing up and disappearing all over the mountain range, but all were spots where the monitoring arrays could not reach. Whoosh. Zhuo Fan finally stopped before the dimly lit mouth of a cave. As he entered, he did not trigger one of the hundreds of monitoring arrays outside. He sighed in relief. Zhuo Fan looked at the cave's walls filled with sparkling crystals shining in a faint light. The sheer density of the spiritual energy was so great it gave him goosebumps. His eyes lit up at the sight. This was the entrance to the sacred mine, and these crystals were the sacred stones the vein formed. All sacred mines had to be formed on top of a world array to condense such a high concentration of sacred stones. That meant that apart from the sacred array, the sacred mine was not suitable for setting up other arrays, or it would end up disturbed by the natural power of the world. Thus, Zhuo Fan was not worried there might be any monitoring or defensive arrays here. Unless, of course, they could set up sacred arrays. Which was an impossibility in the mortal domain. So Zhuo Fan just waltzed in curiously. He wanted to see who this expert was and what kind of an array he set up to protect the sacred mine. He barely took a few steps, and an ear-piercing ringing came. His eyes shook, and Zhuo Fan stopped. What's going on? Is there someone inside? Carefully walking deeper, Zhuo Fan noticed that the ringing intensified. When he reached the end, he was stumped. A 2-meter long sword covered in a prismatic haze floated just above the cave floor. It would sometimes shake and release a mesmerizing ringing sound. The rich spiritual energy from the sacred stones converged on the long sword. Like a newborn pup growing on the sweet milk, the long sword was also sustained under the sacred stone's care. Is that a sacred weapon? Zhuo Fan squinted and cried out. By the looks of it, it's even a 6th-grade sacred weapon, the strongest of the sacred domain. Above the 12th-grade spiritual weapons were the sacred weapons. Only a person from beyond the mortal domain could unleash this weapon's true might. And since sacred stones were needed to refine them, making such beauties was an extremely complicated process. They were a rarity, even in the sacred domain. At least, when Zhuo Fan was the grand leader of the 8 emperors, he could only refine a 3rd-grade sacred weapon, and that was only in theory as well, having never actually done it. The materials weren't available everywhere either. Just going by the requirements of the sacred stone alone, he did not know just how many lands of the Xing clan he had to cheat and how difficult it was to get them off his tail in the process. He never expected the tiny mortal domain to contain such a beauty, the legendary 6th-grade sacred weapon. Such a wonder made his little heart flutter. He had plenty of sacred stones on hand but no sacred weapon. Since he stumbled onto one, was he just going to pass by? Zhuo Fan grinned and walked towards it. I know that all sacred weapons have a conscience, so you must be able to understand me. Look, this place is so damp and gloomy, with no sunlight ever getting in. Aren't you bored sitting here all day, every day? Why not join me out to play? The sword understood Zhuo Fan's intention and shook faintly before emitting a sharp light. Wait. Zhuo Fan jumped back at once and waved his hands. I mean no harm and don't intend to take you for myself. I know sacred weapons need sacred stones to shine and replenish their energy. I have plenty of them with me. If you come with me, you get to soar in the endless sky as we travel the world and have your fill of all you can eat. I'll make sure to make you content. Zhuo Fan was like an uncle swindling children. He showed such an obscene smile too. His hand flashed and took out a sacred stone. See, I'm not lying. I can replenish your energy just as well in my ring. The only difference is that you can also come out to stretch your legs. Would you like to check my ring for yourself? If you don't like it, you're free to come out. You're a sacred weapon, and I can't lock you up. Zhuo Fan tentatively showed his thunder ring in enticement. The long sword looked hesitant. It hummed and went still. Zhuo Fan knew he almost had it and was bursting with excitement. Holy hell, I'm about to have the strongest sacred weapon. This is both of my life dreams come true. His trip to Double Dragon Gathering had paid off hundreds of times over. Even if he weren't forced by Xiao Wuyue's task or Kunping's threat, he'd have come here ages ago for this sweet trinket. Who? However, just as Zhuo Fan was about to hoodwink the sacred weapon, a blue flame flared up from his thunder ring. At the same time, Zhuo Fan's forehead sported the same azure flame, his body crackled with purple lightning, and his right arm flashed crimson. What's going on? Startled, Zhuo Fan was stumped. A chilling bloodthirst swept the cave, and Zhuo Fan's heart tensed as he looked incredulously at the long sword. What just happened? We were getting to the good part, so why the sudden hostilities? He didn't have time to think as the long sword ruthlessly attacked him. Whoosh! With a cold glint, killing intent shot out of the longsword and reached Zhuo Fan in a blink. Zhuo Fan squinted and hurriedly raised his right to block it. PFF. The most astonishing thing happened. Zhuo Fan's invincible Qilin arm offered no resistance to the sword's attack. In a flash, gurgling blood flowed out of it, but Zhuo Fan was too stunned to realize it. How can this be? That was just sword energy, yet it pierced through a sacred beast's body. Just what on earth is a 6th grade sacred weapon made of to be so strong?